On the 18th of January 1974, U.S. diplomatic efforts led to a disengagement of forces agreement with the Egyptian government, and on the 31st of May with the Syrian government. The war was the catalyst for the 1973 oil crisis, a Saudi-led oil embargo in conjunction with OPEC against countries trading with Israel. Severe shortages led to massive increases in the price of oil, and as a result, many countries broke off relations with Israel or downgraded relations, and Israel was banned from participation in Asian Games and other Asian sporting events. Prior to the December 1973 elections, Gahal and a number of right-wing parties united to form the Likud, led by Begin. In the December 1973 elections, Labour won 51 seats, leaving Golda Meir as Prime Minister. The Likud won 39 seats. In May 1974, Palestinians attacked a school in Ma'alat, holding 102 children hostage. 22 children were killed. In November 1974, the PLO was granted observer status at the UN, and Yasser Arafat addressed the General Assembly. Later that year, the Agranat Commission appointed Tosis responsibility for Israel's lack of preparedness for the war, exonerated the government of responsibility, and held the Chief of Staff and Head of Military Intelligence responsible. Despite the report, public anger at the government led to Golda Meir's resignation. 1974-1977, Rabin I. Following Meir's resignation, Yitzhak Rabin became Prime Minister. Religious Zionist followers of the teachings of Abraham Isaac Kook formed the Gush Emunim movement, and began an organized drive to settle the West Bank and Gaza Strip. 347, in November 1975, the United Nations General Assembly, under the guidance of Austrian Secretary General Kurt Waldheim, adopted Resolution 3379, which asserted Zionism to be a form of racism. The General Assembly rescinded this resolution in December 1991 with Resolution 46/86. In March 1976, there was a massive strike by Israeli Arabs in protest at a government plan to expropriate land in the Galilee. 349, in July 1976, Rabin ordered Operation Entebbe to rescue kidnapped Jewish passengers from an Air France flight hijacked by PFLP militants and German revolutionaries and flown to Uganda. 350, in January 1977, French authorities arrested Abu Daoud, the planner of the Munich massacre, releasing him a few days later. 351, in March 1977, Anatoly Sharansky, a prominent refusenik and spokesman for the Moscow-Helsinki group, was sentenced to 13 years hard labor. 352, Rabin resigned in April 1977 after it emerged that his wife maintained a dollar account in the United States, illegal at the time, which had been opened while Rabin was Israeli ambassador. The incident became known as the dollar account affair. 353, Shimon Peres informally replaced him as prime minister, leading the alignment in the subsequent elections. 354, 1977-1983, Begin. In a surprise result, the Likud led by Menachem Begin won 43 seats in the 1977 elections. This was the first time in Israeli history that the government was not led by the left. In November 1977, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat visited Jerusalem and spoke at the Knesset at the invitation of Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Sadat recognized Israel's right to exist and established the basis for direct negotiations between Egypt and Israel. Following Sadat's visit, 350 Yom Kippur War veterans organized the Peace Now movement to encourage Israeli governments to make peace with the Arabs. In March 1978, 11 armed Lebanese Palestinians reached Israel in boats and carried out the Coastal Road massacre in opposition to the Egyptian-Israeli peace process. 3 days later, Israeli forces crossed into Lebanon beginning Operation Litany. After passage of United Nations Security Council Resolution 425, calling for Israeli withdrawal and the creation of the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, peacekeeping force Israel withdrew its troops. Menachem Begin, Jimmy Carter and Anwar Sadat celebrating the signing of the Camp David Accords in September 1978. U.S. President Jimmy Carter invited President Sadat and Prime Minister Begin to meet with him at Camp David, and on the 11th of September they agreed on a framework for peace between Israel and Egypt and a comprehensive peace in the Middle East. It set out broad principles to guide negotiations between Israel and the Arab states. It also established guidelines for a West Bank Gaza transitional regime of full autonomy for the Palestinians residing in these territories, and for a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel. The treaty was signed the 26th of March 1979 by Begin and Sadat, with President Carter signing as witness. Under the treaty, Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt in April 1982. The Arab League reacted to the peace treaty by suspending Egypt from the organization and moving its headquarters from Cairo to Tunis. Sadat was assassinated in 1981 by Islamic fundamentalist members of the Egyptian army who opposed peace with Israel. Following the agreement, Israel and Egypt became the two largest recipients of U.S. military and financial aid, 355. Iraq and Afghanistan have now overtaken them. In December 1978, the Israeli Merkava battle tank entered use with the IDF. In 1979, over 40,000 Iranian Jews migrated to Israel, escaping the Islamic Revolution there. On the 30th of June 1981, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Osirak nuclear reactor in Operation Opera that France was building for Iraq. 3 weeks later, Begin won again, in the 1981 elections, 48 seats Likud, 47 Labour. Ariel Sharon was made defense minister. The new government annexed the Golan Heights and banned the national airline from flying on Shabbat. 356. By the 1980s, a diverse set of high-tech industries had developed in Israel. In the decades following the 1948 war, Israel's border with Lebanon was quiet compared to its borders with other neighbors. But the 1969 Cairo Agreement gave the PLO a free hand to attack Israel from South Lebanon. The area was governed by the PLO independently of the Lebanese government and became known as Fatahland. Fatah was the largest faction in the PLO. Palestinian irregulars constantly shelled the Israeli north, especially the town of Kiryat Shmona, which was a Likud stronghold inhabited primarily by Jews who had fled the Arab world. Lack of control over Palestinian areas was an important factor in causing civil war in Lebanon. In June 1982, the attempted assassination of Shlomo Argov, the ambassador to Britain, was used as a pretext for an Israeli invasion aiming to drive the PLO out of the southern half of Lebanon. Sharon agreed with Chief of Staff Raphael Eitan to expand the invasion deep into Lebanon even though the cabinet had only authorized a 40-kilometer deep invasion. 357. The invasion became known as the 1982 Lebanon War and the Israeli army occupied Beirut, the only time an Arab capital has been occupied by Israel. Some of the Shia and Christian population of South Lebanon welcomed the Israelis as PLO forces had maltreated them, but Lebanese resentment of Israeli occupation grew over time and the Shia became gradually radicalized under Iranian guidance. 358. Constant casualties among Israeli soldiers and Lebanese civilians led to growing opposition to the war in Israel. In August 1982, the PLO withdrew its forces from Lebanon, moving to Tunisia. Bashir Gemayel was elected president of Lebanon, and reportedly agreed to recognize Israel and sign a peace treaty. However, Gemayel was assassinated before an agreement could be signed, and one day later Falangist Christian forces led by Ali Hobeika entered 2 Palestinian refugee camps and massacred the occupants. The massacres led to the biggest demonstration ever in Israel against the war, with as many as 400,000 people, almost 10% of the population, gathering in Tel Aviv. In 1983, an Israeli public inquiry found that Israel's defense minister, Sharon, was indirectly but personally responsible for the massacres. 359. It also recommended Thav never again be allowed to hold the post. It did not forbid him from being prime minister. In 1983, the 17th of May agreement was signed between Israel and Lebanon, paving the way for an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanese territory through a few stages. Israel continued to operate against the PLO until its eventual departure in 1985, and kept a small force stationed in southern Lebanon in support of the South Lebanon Army until May 2000.1983 1992, Shamir I, Peres I, Shamir II. Patriot missiles launched to intercept an Iraqi Scud over Tel Aviv during the Gulf War in September 1983. Begin resigned and was succeeded by Yitzhak Shamir as prime minister. The 1984 election was inconclusive, and led to a power-sharing agreement between Shimon Peres of the Alignment and Shamir of Likud. Peres was prime minister from 1984 to 1986 and Shamir from 1986 to 1988. In 1984, continual discrimination against Sephardi ultra-Orthodox Jews by the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox establishment led political activist Aryeh Deri to leave the Agudat Israel party and join former Chief Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in forming Shas, a new party aimed at the non-Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox vote. In June 1985, Israel withdrew most of its troops from Lebanon, leaving a residual Israeli force and an Israeli-supported militia in southern Lebanon as a security zone and buffer against attacks on its northern territory. Since then, the IDF fought for many years against the Shia organization Hezbollah, which became a growing threat to Israel. By July 1985, Israel's inflation, buttressed by complex index linking of salaries, had reached 480% per annum and was the highest in the world. Peres introduced emergency control of prices and cut government expenditure, successfully bringing inflation under control. The currency, known as the Old Israeli shekel, was replaced and renamed the Israeli new shekel at a rate of 1,000 old shkelim equals 1 new shekel. Growing Israeli settlement and continuing occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip led to the First Intifada in 1987, which lasted until the Oslo Accords of 1993, despite Israeli attempts to suppress it. Human rights abuses by Israeli troops led a group of Israelis to form B'Tselem, an organization devoted to improving awareness and compliance with human rights requirements in Israel. The Alignment and Likud remained neck and neck in the 1988 elections. Shamir successfully formed a national unity coalition with the Labor Alignment. In March 1990, Alignment leader Shimon Peres engineered a defeat of the government in a non-confidence vote and then tried to form a new government. The attempt, which became known as the Dirty Trick, failed and Shamir became prime minister at the head of a right-wing coalition. In August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait, triggering the Gulf War between Iraq and a large allied force, led by the United States. Iraq attacked Israel with 39 Scud missiles. Israel did not retaliate at request of the US, fearing that if Israel responded against Iraq, other Arab nations might desert the Allied coalition. The coalition's victory in the Gulf War opened new possibilities for regional peace, and in October 1991 the US President, George H.W. Bush, and Soviet Union Premier, Mikhail Gorbachev, jointly convened a historic meeting in Madrid of Israeli, Lebanese, Jordanian, Syrian, and Palestinian leaders. Shamir opposed the idea but agreed in return for loan guarantees to help with absorption of immigrants from the former Soviet Union. His participation in the conference led to the collapse of his right-wing coalition. 1992-1996, Rabin II, Perez